Hello everyone, my name is Faizan and thank you so much Mr. Hassan for giving the introduction. Today's webinar is the requirement on opportunities for the development of the environmental management plan, and I hope this will be very informative webinar for all of you. So first of all, in today's webinar we will discuss what is EMP, and then we will discuss about what kind of what type of the EMPs are there, and then we'll discuss about at which stage of the project life cycle normally EMP requires. Then we will discuss about standard rules and regulations, and then we will discuss about limited structure of the EMP, that minimum should be we have to make the minimum structure of the report. We can discuss that one as well, and at the end of this today's webinar we will present the case study as well, in which we will practically show to you that we have developed one of the EMP for the project, and then we will present to you that how we develop the EMP and what are the outcomes. So today we will discuss all about these things. So I will start with the EMP. What is EMP, Environmental Management Plan? Basically, it is a documented procedure in which we have to define or identify the environmental mitigation measures so that it can be incorporated in the life cycle of the project. Basically, in this EMP, first of all, we have to identify environmental impact assessment, environmental impacts, and then accordingly, we have to mention mitigation measures. Along with this, we have to identify the management system requirement as well, that who is responsible for what, and what is the responsibility of the engineers, the project managers, and the employees and the subcontractor. We have to identify all these things, and then accordingly we have to identify the monitoring requirements as well. So EMP is a documented procedure in which we have to identify or we have to define the environmental mitigation measures based on the environmental impacts identified, so that it can be incorporated into the project activities and we can minimize the environmental impact that can be arise from the project. So this is the type of the EMP, environmental management plan. Normally in our region, there are the three kind of EMP. One is a CEMP called Construction Environmental Management Plan. The second one is OEMP, Operational Environmental Management Plan. And the third one is DEMP, Decommissioning Environmental Management Plan. In every region, in other countries, it's only a EMP as well, but it requires that the particular life cycle stage of the life cycle of the project. But it sometimes it's only called the EMP, but in our region, it has been divided into different types depending upon the stage of the project. So one is the CEMP, Construction Environmental Management Plan, is a site-specific plan developed during the construction phase of the project. Before in UAE or in our region, it is a legal requirement or it is a mandatory requirement. Before the commencement of the construction, we have to get NOC or environmental permit from the regulatory authority, and normally regulatory authority requests for the submission of the CMP so that they can see and they can check how the environmental impacts can be managed during the construction. And the second one is OEMP, Operational Environmental Management Plan. It is also a site-specific or industry-specific plan developed to ensure that environmental management practices to eliminate and control environmental impacts are followed during the commissioning and operation phase of the project. There are the two scenarios for the Operational Environmental Management Plan. One is before, if it is a new industry, then before operation of the facility, normally regulatory authority or maybe it's a client's requirement to prepare and submit the OEMP, Operational Environmental Management Plan, if it is a new company. But there is another scenario as well, that if a industry is already operating, and then regulatory may ask to submit the OEMP so that they can see how industry is managing their environmental impacts through the implementation of the mitigation measure. And the third one is that is a DEMP, Decommissioning environmental management plan. DMP is basically a site-specific plan developed to ensure that the appropriate environmental management practices are followed during the decommissioning phase. There are some projects in which there is an involvement of the decommissioning as well. So if that is the case, then we have to submit DEMP. If there is any demolition, if there is any decommissioning of any part of the project, then there is a requirement to submit DEMP as well, either to the regulatory authority or either to the client as well. So EMP requirement, at which stage normally we require the EMP? EMP is required for the three project life cycle. One is the EPC phase. EPC phase mean the construction phase before construction phase, as I mentioned that there are the three kinds of the EMP: construction, operation, and decommissioning. So EMP is required at the EPC stage or the construction stage before the commencement of the construction. Then operation stage, I mentioned before as well that there are the two scenarios for the operation. First is if the industry is new, then before operation of the facility, we have to submit the OEMP, or there is another requirement can be arises during the operation stage. If the industry is already operating, then regulatory authority may ask to submit the OEMP. And the third one is decommissioning or the disposal stage. If there is any demolition, any decommissioning during the life cycle of the project, then regulatory authority or the client may ask to submit the decommissioning or a disposal at disposal stage to submit the DMP. Now we will discuss about the scope of the EMP. In the scope of the EMP, then management and the mitigation measures, then the institutional arrangements. Institutional arrangements, as I mentioned at the start, that we have to identify the responsibilities. For example, project manager, what are their responsibilities for the implementation of the EMP? Then we have to identify the responsibilities of the engineers, the employees, and the subcontractors, and what are the resources we require. Implementation and the supervision responsibilities, and then we have to identify the monitoring and the evaluation requirement. Then how we can evaluate and monitor the requirement. Implementation schedule, training needs, and the budget. In EMP, we will show you in our next slides as well that we have to identify the training needs as well. That what are the training needs or what are the trainings required to implement EMP as well. Then includes measure to consider project during implementation and operation, and provide action to be taken to implement these measures. For example, if we feel that after the evaluation or the review of the EMP, and we feel that there is a still room and there is a still space to improve the implementation, then we have to provide the action as well to be taken to implement these measures as well. The objectives of the EMP. The first one is develop procedures to implement the project mitigation measures and monitoring requirement. The aim of an EMP are to minimize negative impacts. This is one of the major objective of the EMP, to minimize the environmental negative impacts. Then we can increase the positive impacts as well, and then provide editable commitment to practical and achievable strategies and design standards. Develop an integrated plan for a comprehensive monitoring and control of the project impacts, and ensure the community that the environmental management of the project is acceptable. This is also one of the part and the objective, that the community ensure the community that the environmental management of the project is acceptable. We have to check and we have to ensure that the environmental management that we are implementing to minimize the negative impact, it must be acceptable to the community as well. So what does EMP covers? Basically, it documents, it identifies the methods and the procedures, and then it identifies the environmental performance indicators, Then EMP is based on the compiled information and data during environmental screening and the EIA. Basically EMP is outcome of the EIA as well. So EMP is based on the compiled information. So EMP can be developed and we can compile the information that we gathered or collected during the screening or the EIA. Then we have to summarize the target objectives and regulations, nominates the individual responsible and give target dates. As I mentioned before as well, that EMP also provide the institutional requirement at what resources we require to implement the EMP and who is responsible for what. That what is the responsibility of the project manager, what is the responsibility of the engineers, HSC engineers, environmental engineers, and environmental officers. Then what are the responsibilities of all the employees, and what are the responsibilities for the subcontractor as well. These are the elements of the EMP, that description of the mitigation measures, how they will be implemented, description of the residual environmental concerns after the mitigation measures, how they will be managed. Then there is a particular monitoring program as well, and then identification of who will be responsible and who will be accountable for implementing the EMP. Developing a monitoring plan, including items to be monitored, when, frequency, and by whom. In some region, it is also called the EMMP, EMP Environmental Management and Monitoring Plan. And in some region, it is only called the EMP, but either it's EMMP or either it's EMP, we have to develop a monitoring plan that must be monitored, and we have to identify the frequency, and we have to identify how we have to monitor. For example, if we identify there is a negative impact on the air quality, then we have to give the monitoring plan to measure the air quality, and then we have to identify the frequency, and we have to identify the methodology as well, that how it must be monitored. And then preparing cost estimate for implementation of EMMP. Then there are some regions, there is a requirement to give the budget as well, or the cost, that how we can implement EMMP or EMP. Identify the sources of the fund as well as potential training needs, if any. Then importance of the EMP. Basically, before going into another slide, we can have a questions. From our participants, so that we can address them as well.
Yes, we've received a few questions. Now, there's a question: is it possible to incorporate applicable provisions of ISO 14001 in formulating the EMP?
Yes, basically, environmental management system ISO 14001. It is also based on EMP, can be based on the ISO 14001 because both are interrelated. And in EMS, basically, we have identified the resources. It is a plan, do, act, check. So these same thing can be incorporated in the EMP as well.
Okay, and then is the EMP done along with the EIA or prior to it? Is there any sequence?
As I mentioned before, EMP is basically an outcome of the EIA. It cannot be, it's not possible that first we will submit or we will prepare the EMP and then EIA. No, it's not the case. First of all, first we have to submit the EIA, and then EMP is basically the outcome of the EIA as well. In some scenarios, there is a, let's suppose if there is a project that is going to be start for the construction, so regulatory authority may ask to submit the EIA as well before the commencement to get the NOC of that particular project. And if EIA is approved, then regulatory may ask to submit the CMP as well for the contractors to implement during the construction. So EMP is always after the EIA report, and it's outcome of the EIA.
Okay. Another question is in the scope of the EMP, what is meant by the institutional arrangements?
Yes, institutional arrangements, as I mentioned, that these what are the resources that we require and who is responsible for what. What is the responsibility of the project manager? What is the responsibility of the engineers, employees, subcontractors? So these are the institutional arrangements that we have to identify while preparing the EMP.
Okay, and is this only related to the environmental impacts of construction operations and decommissioning?
Yes, normally these are the life cycle of the project. There are the three, as I mentioned, there are the three kinds of the EMP, CMP, OEMP, and DMP. But in some other region, it's only called the EMP or EMMP, depending upon the stage of the project. Either it's at the region if it's only the EMP, and if it's required before the construction, then we have to cover the construction impacts. And then if it's only the operation, then we have to cover the operations.
Okay, let's do one more question. So if there is any issue or non-compliance that's observed during the EMP stage, can one go ahead with the next stage of the project, or do they need to wait until we mitigate those issues first?
There are the two kinds of the scenarios. One is the regulatory requirement, and the second is the client's requirement. And if the issue is identified while preparing or submission of the EMP, and it is not properly addressed in the EMP, then there is a case that regulatory authority may not give you the NOC or the permit until you resolve that particular issue, or to minimize the negative impact from the project.
Okay, so let's continue for now. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we will start the importance of the EMP. An instrument, it's an instrument for implementing environmental management commitments, condition, and requirements. It's basically promotes self-regulation and integration. Then it also addresses relevant environmental management issues and can be drafted in consultative manner, incorporates regulatory requirements, and facilitate environmentally sustainable development and decision-making process. It able to form the basis for consultation, flexible, comprehensive, updatable, and a tool for promoting accountability. Here, as I mentioned that in different regions, there are the different names of the EMP. In some regions, it's called EMMP, and in some regions, it's called the EMP as well. And it basically the structure of the EMP can be changed from region to region. But we will present to you a structure of different EMPs that normally we follow, like CMP and OEMP, and then DMP as well. And in either in EMP, or either it's EMMP, it's basically the theme or the aim of the EMP is the same, that we have to minimize the negative impacts that can be arising from the project, either during construction, operation, or the decommissioning. EMMP, we have it's addition of the monitoring plan, and the same monitoring plan is already in the EMP as well. So both are the same thing. This is basically the report structure that normally we follows. You can see that there is an introduction, then we have to give the project description. It's basically a report structure of the CMP. Then we have to give the project description during the construction. Then we have to identify the baseline conditions or the sensitive receptors. We have to give the schedule and the milestone. Then this is the environmental management. This environmental management is basically the form of the institutional requirement. That we have to develop the policy statement, then we have to develop the environmental management system of that particular facility or the project proponent, then roles and responsibilities. This is the accountability, that who is responsible for what, what is the responsibility of the engineers, what is the responsibility of the managers, what is the responsibility of all the employees, and what is the responsibility of the subcontractors. We have to identify in the environmental management. Then regulations and the requirement. What are the rules and the regulation that are applicable on that particular project. Then environmental awareness and training. This is the section where we have to identify the training needs, that what are the environmental awareness or the training that we require to implement the environmental management plan, and to increase the implementation as well. Then document review and the update. After every year, or as necessary, 6 months or 1 year, after 1 year, we should review the document, and we have to update the document as well, so that we can see how effective the EMP is, and if we feel that there is a still room and there is a still space for the improvement, then we should update the document as well. Then environmental commitments. We have to show the commitments, that how we can reduce the negative impact from the project. And then the coordination with external entities and addressing complaints. Then we have to identify that what procedure we should follow to address the external entities and addressing the complaints. Maybe during the construction and operation, you might receive a complaint, or you might receive an inspection from regulatory authority or from external body, and then you should develop a procedure how you should coordinate with such external entities and addressing the complaint. Then environmental impacts. Then what are the environmental impacts that can be arises during the project? That, for example, air emission. Then there is a marine terrestrial ecology. Then there is a water management system, and there is a traffic. There are some impacts that must be identified or discussed during the CMP. And then accordingly, we have to develop the control plans to control or to minimize the negative impacts of the project that arises in the previous section, environmental impact. We have to develop the air quality plan. We have to develop the erosion and the sediment control plan, soil, groundwater, terrestrial ecology, water quality and marine ecology, noise and vibration, traffic control, waste management, chemical and hazardous, contingency plan, emergency management plan, security plan, and infrastructure plan. And the next section, that is the monitoring and auditing. This is the section that I was explaining to you before, that in some region it's called the EMMP, and we normally call it only the EMP. This is the monitoring and the auditing. In this section, we have to identify how we should measure or monitor the environmental components, for example, air quality, noise, and everything, and then how auditing should be carried out, how the reporting should be carried out. For example, how we should report incidents. Then what is a procedure for the periodic or the quarterly performance report. Then monitoring compliance and audit reports. Environmental checklist that must be implemented during the life cycle of the project. And then procedure to review, inspection, and step to address the non-compliance. That if there is any non-compliance that we found that during the implementation and during the inspection, then we have to develop a procedure how we should review or how we have to address the non-compliance. And the next one is the documentation, that what minimum documents we have to require for implementation and the record as well. And this is the report structure of the OEMP. It is more or less, it is the same. The only thing is that in the project description, we have to describe the project activities related to the operation. Basically, the operating activities we have to mention instead of the construction, and the rest is almost the same as the CMP. And this is the report structure. This is the report structure for the DMP, and it is also the same as the previous structures. The only difference is that in the project description, we have to describe the decommissioning activities that will be carried out during the project. So now we will go to the standards and the regulations that are required, or that enforce us to develop the EMP and to protect the environment. The UAE Federal Law 24 of 1999, then Law number 5, 2016, the Waste Management Law 21 of 2005, then Federal Law 19 of 1993, then Vienna Convention, Montreal Protocol, Convention on International Trades in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. Then there are the international donors as well, like IFC, EHS guidelines and IFC performance standard. Then regulatory guidelines, like in our region, it's the EAD. So there is a technical guidelines from the EAD, and then a NOx standard as well, or the client specific. Now we will present a case study that we have developed for our project, that is operation and construction. In this case study, it's a good thing that the regulatory authority asked us to develop or to cover operation and construction both in the one management plan. Basically, it's a well drilling and the testing operation in the region. And initially, I'm just giving you the background of this project. Before commencement of the project, the regulatory authority asked us to submit the environmental impact assessment, and then we have submitted and got approval on the environmental management plan, environmental impact assessment, and then on the approval of the environmental impact assessment, the regulatory authority asked us to submit the EMP environmental management plan to cover both the operation and the construction. So basically, it's a OCMP. It's a combination and it's an integration of both the construction environmental management plan and operational environmental management plan. Case study overview. Basically, as I mentioned, that it's a drilling operation. The client intends to drill the 2 appraisal wells in the region and the 3 exploratory wells. The each side of the well is 200 meter into 200 meter shall be constructed. This is the region. This is the reason why regulatory authority asked us to submit CMP as well, or the EMP covering the construction, because there is a construction of the site or the preparation of the site as well. Then the camp of 200 meter into 200 meter, and then the rig shall be moved once the rig move road. Then there is a route we have to develop as well, and for the rest of the well location, a similar well construction is need to be developed. These were the activities, project activities. In the construction activities, we have to prepare the site. There is a requirement of the civil and earthwork, excavation, backfilling, sand embankment, stabilization by gauge, and reinstatement of the protection burn. So these are the construction activities, and this is the reason why regulatory authority asks us to cover the construction impacts as well while preparing a submission of the EMP. Then while drilling activities, positioning and rig up, drill surface hole, surface casing, cementing, rig up and test for BOP stack, drill intermediate or production hole, intermediate or production casing, production liner, and cementing. These are the activities, the project activities that was carried out on the site. And these are the well testing activities, the drill steam testing of the wells. All the testing equipments like mesh tree plug, etc. will be of the international standard. Testing of all the wells was carried out with the best industrial practices with minimum flaring. This is the location, basically the appraisal well 2 and appraisal well 1. These were the 2 well locations where the drilling and testing was carried out, and we have prepared the environmental impact assessment, and as the outcome of EIA we have developed environmental management plan as well. This is the layout as well. So this is the environmental management framework. This is the environmental management framework. Is there any question?
Yeah. We'll see some questions. So one question is, what percentage of total project cost can be referred to as an environmental budget?
Basically, it depends. It depends on the kind of the project. There is no hard and fast rule that how much budget we should allocate. The only thing is that we have to ensure that there must be an implementation of the EMP. So accordingly, we can allocate the budget.
Yeah, and we have received multiple questions regarding the responsibility or responsible person for preparing the EMP. So is it a part of the project department or a separate team which prepares the same?
Actually, there are different scenarios. There are the different scenarios in different region. In our region, the environmental management plan must be prepared by the approved consultant by the regulatory authority. It cannot be developed by the internal team or the project team. It must be prepared by the external consultant. And yes, review or update can be possible by internally, but the initially submission and the approval of the EMP must be by external third-party consultant.
Yeah. So another question is, without EIA, can we make EMB for the project?
Yes, it can be possible. It can be possible that without EIA we can prepare the EMP. In the start of today's webinar, I mentioned a thing that EMP is required during the operation stage as well. And at that time, I mentioned there are the two scenarios. That during the operation phase, the regulatory may ask to submit operational environmental management plan for the new facility for the operation. And there is another scenario that is during existing facility which is already operating and there was no background of EIA. At that time, a regulatory may ask to submit OEMP as well, and during the operation of the existing facility. So EMP can be prepared without environmental impact assessment.
Yeah. Then another question, is it possible to have all the three EMB combined into one report?
Basically, it's not that case. Basically, if that is the case, then definitely there is a EIA, environmental impact assessment, in which we have to cover the life cycle of the project, starting from the construction, operation, and if there is any decommissioning as well. But again, it's a regulatory authority. If they feel that we can cover all three together, then it can be possible, like the case study that we are presenting, in which a regulatory authority asked us to cover construction and operation both. So we have developed OCMP. But normally it's a very rare case in which we can merge or integrate all the management plan together.
Yeah, and the question is DEMP necessary to include along with CMP and OEMP?
It's as I mentioned that decommissioning is DMP is required during the decommissioning or demolition. If the project requires a demolition or decommissioning, then we have to develop the DMP. And again, I will say that it is a regulatory authority who decides that either we can integrate or not. But it's a very rare case. Normally, separate plans is required for each stage of the project.
So another question is, do you have a standard monitoring and evaluation tool for environmental impact assessment?
It's a monitoring and auditing on the basis of the project, and on the basis of the project structure or the resource structure, we can develop what are the monitoring and auditing tools that we require to implement the EMP. It is not, as I mentioned, that it is not hard and fast rule. We have to see what are the environmental impacts, and then what are the mitigation measures, and what resources we require. Let's suppose if the impacts are high and it's more negative, then we require more budget, we require more resources, then we have to require monitoring and accordingly auditing accordingly. So it depends on the nature of the project as well, that what resources and what monitoring and auditing tool we can develop for the effective implementation of the EMP.
In Dubai regulatory EMS, does IEE also a part of regulation?
Yeah, in Dubai, there is also a requirement of the IEE. IEE is basically a form of the EIA, and it depends on the project in Dubai. there are the different kinds of the project depending upon the project. For example, if the project is high or more negative impact, then authority requests for the environmental impact assessment. And if the project having a less or minimum negative impacts, then regulatory authority asks for the IEE, initial environmental examination. So initial environmental examination, or EIA, is the same thing. The only difference is the nature of the project. But management plan is a separate plan that required during the life cycle of the project.
Yeah. So now we'll go back into the presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Gayatri. So now we will go to the project location, location map, and the environmental management program. As I mentioned in the structure of the report, that environmental management section requires the policy statement, management system roles and responsibilities, regulation and the requirement, environmental awareness and the training, document review, update, environmental commitments, and coordination with external entities, and addressing complaints. So the policy statement that we developed, that is the leadership and the commitment. Then we have developed the objectives. Then we have developed the organization, resources, and the competence, risk evaluation, planning, standard and procedure, implementation and the monitoring, audit, review. These are the management system. I think there was one question as well related to the environmental management system, ISO 14001 and EMP. So basically they are integrated to each other as well. The company that the project proponent was ISO certified 14001 and energy management system as well. And then there was a project specific HSE plan as well. Then we developed roles and responsibilities in this OCEMP. That what is the roles and responsibility for the regulatory authority. We defined that the responsibility that it is the responsibility of the regulatory authority to review and to comment and to give the approval on the OCEMP and regular inspection as well, and the guidance. Then the project proponent, and it is the responsibility of the project proponent to develop the management plan and to ensure the implementation as well. Then the project manager, it is the one of the person responsible for the implementation of the management plan. It is the person who identify the resources that required for the implementation of the EMP. It is the person who guide the team members. It is a person who carried out and to ensure the auditing and the monitoring as well. Then the construction manager, HSE manager. So we have defined all the responsibility of the key persons that involved during the project as well, which include the environmental engineers, officers, subcontractors, drilling supervisors, drilling contractors, and all employees as well. Then the next section, that is the regulation and the requirement, legislation framework, that is the national environmental laws and the regulation. Then the local regulatory authority approval, rules and the regulations. Then ad hoc standards, international convention and the protocols. Then there are some standards and the guidelines. Standard and guidelines provided in UAE Federal Law 12/2016. Then there is a client-specific standard as well, like at NOC, ENI, and other client-specific. Then EAD technical user guideline as well. So this is the environmental awareness and the training. You might remember that there was one of the session that requires or identify the environmental awareness and the training needs. So in this project, we have developed the training topics that the environmental policy and the compliance statement, CMP induction, EAD permit conditions, marine ecology and water quality control procedure, pollution prevention, waste management procedure, hazardous substances management, air and noise control procedure, spill prevention and emergency response, incident reporting procedure, then special training, marine and mammal, reptile, and then other special training as well. So these, on your left hand side, there are the person that requires to attend the trainings, which include the project proponent, manager, project engineer, HSE manager, environmental engineer, procurement team, supervisor. Depending upon their involvement in the project, against the topic that we had identified that requires to give the training, we have identified that these guys must attend the training. Then the document review of the OCMP is required to maintain the why we require the review of the document. It basically required to continuous improvement, suitability and effectiveness of the OCMP while reviewing the OCMP or the environmental management plan. We can see the suitability and the effectiveness as well, and the performance as well. Conditions that determine changes in the OCMP. There are some scenarios. On that basis, OCMP requires the changes or the update. Changes in the work scope which necessitates a significant modification in site activities. If there is any modification in the project activities or the project schedule, then we have to update, or we have to review the OCMP or the EMP. Extension of the current scope. If there is any changes or the extension of the scope, then we have to review or update the OCMP or the EMP. Changes in the local, national and international regulatory requirement. If during the implementation of the project or during the execution of the project, if there is any change in the local, national or international regulatory authority, then we have to update the management plan as well. And then the review of the current environmental plans by client or the third party review, which may lead to the corresponding request for an update of the OCMP. If there is any client's requirement, if they feel that it's not effective and it should be more effective, then we have to update or review the OCMP. Then environmental commitments. The company and the contractor commits to adhere to the standard and the procedures detailed in the OCMP. In particular, company and the contractor aspire to achieve the following objectives: comply with the local, national, international regulatory requirements, contribute to delivering the project environment and sustainable policy objective. So these are all the commitments that project proponent identified and with the objective, and we have listed in the OCMP. So this is the basically the procedure that we developed for the coordination with the external entities and addressing the complaints. The following not limited will be considered as a form of external communication: telephonic and documentary communication with EAD. EAD is the regulatory authority. External complaint closure notification internally, and notification clarification to be provided to regulatory authority in case of environmental incident. If there is any environmental incident, for example, oil spillage, leakages, then we have to then we have to notify, or we have to clarify the regulatory authority as well. The complaints will be treated as described below. Identify the nature of the complaints reported and its impact and severity on the environment. Request an immediate investigation by the environment team. Verify environmental condition and mitigation measures required and necessary preventive actions. Immediate corrective action will be undertaken, followed by an investigation, and the complaint will be closed out with supporting documents, photos and reports. So these are the complaint procedure that we identified during the execution of the project. These are the potential environmental impacts: air emission impacts, surface and water impacts, soil and groundwater, terrestrial ecology, marine ecology, noise and vibration impact, traffic, waste management impact, and socio-economic. Air emission, basically the sources are site clearance, concrete work, excavation work, diesel generator, stockpiling, vehicular movement, wind erosion, well drilling, testing, and flaring. So these are the sources of the air emission. Basically, the probable impact on surface water could be due to the accident or deliberate discharge of untreated waste. However, the project is site. Basically, there was no surface water near the project site, so there is no significant impact identified due to the project activity. The soil and the groundwater impact can be due to the contamination of the soil and the groundwater, accidental spillage, improper storage of the waste, loss of topsoil due to site clearance, improper disposal of storm water, sewage, and industrial wastewater at project site. So these were the main sources for the soil and the groundwater impact. Then the terrestrial ecology. In this project, removal of the vegetation, artificial lighting disturb fauna species, noise generation may disturb natural habitat. Then there is the chances of the off-road vehicle management may damage flora or fauna, accidental spillage of fuel and hazardous chemicals may disturb local ecology. Then marine ecology. The project is very far from the marine environment. Therefore, there is no impact that can be arises on the marine ecology. Then there is any questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can see some questions. So we will answer some questions lively which are repeatedly asking. So what is the minimum expected data from client or end user in construction phase?
Basically, we have to see the project activities. We should know. We have to see. We should have the complete construction activities from the client side, and then what are their organizational structure for that particular project, so that we can develop the environmental management system or the framework, and then accordingly, if it is the outcome of the previous EIA. For example, if previously EIA was carried out for that particular project, then you should have that particular EIA as well, so that you can describe the baseline and sensitive receptor locations in the construction environmental management plan, and the rest is your site visits that require, so that you can see what are the nature or the location of the project, and accordingly you can develop the CNP.
So another question is, what does EAD stands for?
EAD is basically a regulatory authority in our region, that is the Environment Agency Abu Dhabi. It is the name of the regulatory authority.
What is the time limitation in reporting an environmental incident to the authority?
It's again on depends on the regulatory authority, but I guess in every region it is the mandatory requirement from all the regulatory authority to report environmental incident immediately. Immediately we have to notify to them either through official letter, either through email, or either through the telephone with proper record, so that it can be identified that the reporting is done.
Yeah. Another question is regarding the quantification of EMB. So what are the parameters required? So we will have the initial identification or screening, which all needs a quantification and which all can be assessed through a qualitatively. Like air, noise and all you can assess quantitatively, but social impacts we used to assess it qualitatively only. So other parameters which was there in the question is particularly regarding the acid rain toxicology and all. So those parameters which can be analyzed qualitatively will be considered in a qualitative way only.
Yeah, absolutely right. Basically, in the EMP as well, mostly we covers qualitatively as well, depending upon the availability of the data and the previous screening and the EIA report. In the management plan, it's basically a management plan that what are the impacts and what are the ways to manage those impacts. So in this way, we identify the impacts and we propose some mitigation measures to minimize the negative impacts, or we feel that if it's negative or more dangerous, then we have to identify more strict mitigation measures, and we have to identify more resources so that EMP can be implemented properly.
And another question was, what is the meaning of project proponent?
Project proponent is the company or is the person who proposed the project, who is the owner of the project, basically, who is going to launch the project. That is the project proponent.
Okay. Who is the person or authority that monitors compliance in an EMP? Or are there any penalties or fines being imposed for non-compliance?
Yes, basically in every region there is a regulatory authority, or while if I talk about in our region, whenever we submit environmental management plan, there is always a condition that we receive from the regulatory authority, that is the EAD, to submit a quarterly audit report that must be carried out by the external third party consultant. So that third-party consultant carried out the environmental audit, and that audit report must be submitted to the regulatory authority minimum on a quarterly basis, or either the biannual basis or annual basis, depending upon the nature of the project. And if the issues continues found in the audit report, then regulatory authority may ask to either minimize the impact, or if it still persist, then there is a chances of the fine. There is a chances of to stoppage the work as well. So it's quarterly audit, biannual audit, or annual audit is required to see the effectiveness of the environmental management plan.
What happens in oil and gas exploration to discover the hydrocarbon? The stage is still discovery stage and not inception, which EMP will be developed.
Basically, in that particular stage, as I mentioned, in this particular case, we develop the environmental impact assessment, and then we have developed OCMP covering construction and operation both. If that is the case, then there are the two scenarios. First is you need to get the regulatory approval from the regulatory authority, and then regulatory authority may ask to submit environmental impact assessment instead of the management plan. And if it is not required by the regulatory authority and it is the requirement of your client, and then still at that stage, environmental impact assessment is required to cover the full life cycle of the project. And after that, environmental management will be required as the outcome of the EIA.
What are the specific characteristics for EMB for offshore than onshore activities?
Basically, as I mentioned, as we given to you the structure of the report, the CMP or the OEMP, in that particular cases, there are the impacts that we have to identify. For example, the marine ecology and the water resources. In every, for example, the air emission impact that we can identify onshore will be different from the offshore. In the same way, the impacts that can be identified for the offshore will be different from the onshore. The structure of the EMP will remain the same if it is going to be submitted to the regulatory authority. But yes, the impacts identification will be different. The impacts on the onshore, the level of the impacts on the onshore will be different from the impacts on the offshore. Because let's suppose if in this particular case that we are presenting, the marine ecology or the marine environment was not near to the project. That's why we scoped out. But in the offshore, definitely there will be the impact on the marine ecology. So we have to identify those impacts and we have to give the mitigation measures.
At what stages normally an EMP to be reviewed, and on what is the minimum information we need for the review of an EMP?
As I mentioned before as well, that the minimum we have to see on the annual basis, we have to review on the annual basis. But yes, there are some circumstances on which we have to review or update the environmental management plan that I mentioned before, that if there is any change in the project activities, if there is any change in the current extension of the current scope, and if there is a change in any local, national and international regulatory rules and regulation, then and if we feel that it's not effective, then we have to see, we have to update or we have to review the environmental management plan.
Okay, now we will go back into the presentation.
Thank you, Gayatri. Now we will go to the noise and the vibration. In this particular project, the sources of the noise and the vibration were noise generation during SS road, noise generated by the rotating parts, noise generated by the vehicular movement, noise generated by the heavy machinery and the drawworks. Traffic impacts, it can be increase of the traffic load on the local roads, vehicular movement involved in the project's operation could hinder normal public vehicle transport system. So these are the impacts that identify. Waste management, construction, demolition and excavation waste, sanitary waste, wash water from equipment, then the drilling mud. In this particular project, water waste mud was used water used for cleaning, drilling waste, generation of the waste, process water, and hazardous waste from the processes. Socioeconomic impacts. Negative impact is the change in the social culture and the norms of the local community, traffic congestion. Positive impact can be employment opportunities for local community and increase in local economy as well. So these are now we are going to the environmental control and the mitigation measures or the control plans. These were the minimum control plans that we have developed for this particular project, merging both CMP and the OEMP. First one is the air quality mitigation and the control plan. We have developed that the vehicle will be maintained regularly. A speed limit, water sprinkling should be done on regular basis. Unnecessary site clearance should be avoided. Burning of waste is avoided. Environmental site inspection checklist should be updated regularly, and stack emission monitoring should be conducted. And then the soil and the groundwater control plan, mitigation measures, appropriate spill containment kits should be available. Proper and specified area for mixing of dry chemicals. Waste pit with liner will be constructed. Provision of the dedicated hazardous waste. Sanitary waste water should be collected in STP. Fuel and chemicals should be stored in impervious storage area. Then terrestrial ecology, minimization of the vegetation clearance, implement vehicle speed limit policy, off-road driving should be discouraged, hunting of fauna species should be avoided, minimize noise and the light pollution. Then next is the noise and the vibration. Sound suppression devices such as mufflers will be installed. Use of noise berm between high noise generators and the sensitive receptors. Direct vents such that they will carry noise away from the sensitive receptors, and implement vehicle speed limit policy. Then the traffic mitigation control plan, speed restriction, security checking in and out, adequate parking and signposting, and appropriately designed junctions. Waste management control plan, the procedure and the aim is waste reduction, waste reuse, waste minimization, appropriate waste storage, appropriate waste disposal, on-site treatment, and use of sustainable materials. Chemical and hazardous material management, the agenda of the aim is elimination, removal of hazardous substances that is not essential, substitution using a less hazardous substances, isolation, separation of a process from employees by distance or by barriers. And then we can put engineering control using machinery, equipment, or process that minimize workplace contamination, and the labeling and the signage. This is the contingency plan that we developed, Tier 1, Tier A, Tier B, and Tier C. Tier A is the minor incident, Tier B medium, and Tier C major or the emergency. Minor is the one that is easily brought under control, medium one that will need to be brought under control and prevented from the reoccurrence, and the major one which cannot be controlled by the project and that affects local authority and independent parties. Emergency management plan, in this plan we cover emergency response organization, list of emergency coordinators, emergency procedures, and emergency evacuation. We have developed emergency coordinators, and we identified that coordinators, and we have given their position and the contact numbers. Then we developed the procedure that the emergency response procedure will cover the following: near miss incident, site emergencies, other incident, vehicle accident incident, and fatality and the fire. And then social management, social management and the control plan, cross culture session should be conducted among workers. Unnecessary interaction of site workers with local community should be avoided. Protection of cultural heritage should be done. HSE training should be conducted on a regular basis. This is the next session, that is the reporting and auditing requirement. In this particular section, we identify the incident reporting, periodic or the quarterly performance reporting. Reporting requirement: environmental incident will be investigated as soon as possible after the event. Periodic or the quarterly environmental report should be contain all the recommendations that have been specified in OCMP side. HSE team should organize and manage internal HSE audit and external audit as well. And this is the basically auditing that we have developed for the internal auditing in accordance with the refueling procedure. There are the different HSE programs, and then we have set the targets and the frequency, And then we have developed the action and responsible party as well. External audit as well, there is a always by the external third party consultant, or the head office can also carry out external audit as well. The environmental inspection and audit will be documented in the following: contractor daily progress report, weekly inspection record, internal audit program, external audit, internal audit reports, external audit report, register of ANSIs and CAPs, and contractor close out environmental inspection reports. So this is all about environmental operational construction environmental management plan that we have developed for this project, and our overview of the environmental management plan. So is there any question?
Yeah, we'll see some questions, final set of questions. Can you please share standards and regulations involved with the EMB once again? So can you just share this?
Slides, okay. So these are the minimum legal framework and the standard in our region. It's basically, it's varies from region to region. This is the legal framework in our region in UAE. That's why we have mentioned UAE federal law related to the protection of the environment, groundwater protection, waste management, and then federal law related to the marine species, ozone depletion. Then there are some convention that every country who signed that particular convention must obey that convention as well, which include the Vienna Convention, Montreal, and Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species. So these are the minimum convention that every country who signed this convention must follow. And then other than these, every country have their own legal framework and the standards.
Is CMP and waste management plan are separate documents, or we can combine it together in Abu Dhabi?
Yes, it's a normally waste management plan is not required by the regulatory authority. It is only the internal requirement or the client's requirement. So and in the CMP, we are covering the waste management. So if it is only related to the regulatory authority, then no need to develop separate waste management plan. But yes, if it is a client's requirement, that might require you to submit or you develop a separate waste management plan, which will be based on the waste management procedures that develop in the CMP.
So how auditing is linked with project management?
Basically, project manager is responsible to arrange the internal audit and the external audit. Internal audit to make sure that the EMP is implementing, and external audit will check the compliance against the EMP. So project management and auditing are interlinked. Without project management, auditing cannot be possible, because the project management is the source who identify and provide the resources to carry out and to review the update and the review of the EMP and carry out the auditing.
So during this is again related to a COVID question. So during pandemic lockdown, how emergency management plan works out?
Yes, again, it depends on the location of the project. And definitely nowadays there is a COVID-19, and accordingly we have to prepare procedures to address the COVID-19 situation as well. In every project site, they have developed their own COVID-19 procedures that every weekly basis there should be a test, or bi-weekly basis. It depends on the government rules and regulations as well. And they mention to maintain the social distance as well. They mention the mitigation measures to avoid the gathering. They mention to avoid any gathering that can be a risk for the community. And if there is any positive case, then we have to quarantine as well. So accordingly, the emergency procedure, particularly for the COVID-19, is based on the regulatory or the government rules and the regulations that a particular country is maintaining.
Then next question. How the impact benchmarks will be used to measure the environmental components that will be affected by the business plan or activity based on standard quality standards?
Basically, if we identify the environmental impacts, and accordingly, if we are monitoring them, and if we are getting the reports that it is a breaching of the laws. For example, if I will give you one example, if we are monitoring the air quality and the air quality is not good and it's breaching and exceed the prescribed limit, so it's mean that we are breaching the law. And if we are breaching the law, then ultimately the regulatory authority will take an action, and then definitely it can impact on your business continuity as well. So all these things are interlinked with each other. If we are following the environmental laws and the regulations, and if our project is in compliance with the rules and the regulations of that particular country, then there is a continuity of the business. In if we are breaching, or if the standards, we are exceeding the standard limits, then definitely there is a chances of the discontinuity as well.
Yeah. So one final question: what are the limitations of conducting the EMP?
Limitations of conducting the EMP is basically is not as such. As I mentioned, that EMP is outcome of the EIA, and in some cases it is a standalone document as well, and it is required to submit to the regulatory authority or to the client, and to make sure that the environmental impacts identified during the project life cycle of the project is mitigated through the implementation of the mitigation measures.
Yeah. So we have answered most of the questions.
And thank you all of you for your actively participation and for your questions. I hope we have answered all the questions, and it's a very informative webinar for you. And please keep in touch with our social pages so that you may know that what will be our next webinar, and it will be very effective and informative for you as well.
So thank you, Faizan and Gayatri. I'd just like to add one more thing. We'll also be conducting a paid training, certified EIA professional soon in the coming weeks. So please stay tuned to our LinkedIn page and our website, and we'll be sharing more details with all of you. So we hope that you found today's webinar useful. So we tried to answer as many questions as we could in this limited time. We've answered over 150 questions. If there's anything in particular that you would like to discuss, anything technical, please feel free to write us an email, and Gayatri and Faizan would be there to assist you. So thank you everyone again for joining us, and see you in the upcoming weeks.